Hello everyone, and welcome to Character Gallery. I'm Master of the Lemons, aka Lemmy.
And I'm HiroTheJapaneseTrain, aka Matt.
And before we get started, we've got an announcement. And it's a little bit of an unfortunate announcement. So, we've been talking a lot about how we handle guests on this show. When we first started bringing guests onto Character Gallery, that was because Matt really didn't have a lot of time. He was just not available a lot. And so I had to bring in people to kind of be stand-ins. Matt has more time now, and I'm sure, as you could see, in the last several episodes have all featured him. So the whole function of the guest thing isn't as necessary now. When we first started the guest service, my first thought was, okay, well, we'll get through everybody eventually. But that was back when there were 5 or 10 applications. And now, there's over 50 applications. There's 50 people who want to come on Character Gallery at some point. And it's getting to the point where I've realized that it just isn't practical to try and bring everybody on. It just becomes stressful, because ultimately the reason me and Matt started this show together was so we could talk about characters together. It wasn't really to bring on guests. And while I have really enjoyed bringing on the people that we've brought on so far, I think that if we keep making guests a priority, then it will hurt our passion for the show, because that's not why we got into it in the first place. And with Matt around now, it doesn't make sense for us to keep looking at guests as an obligation, which is why I hate to say this, but we're not going to be bringing on any more guests on this show out of obligation. So there might be times in the future where we do bring on guests, but it's just going to kind of be when the moment strikes us and when we feel like that's the right move for us for a given episode. Most of the time, though, by default, me and Matt will just be doing episodes just us. So don't expect to get on Character Gallery. I know a lot of people have applied. We've got over 50 people who have applied. I know that there's a lot of people enthusiastic about coming on. I'm happy to talk to you on Twitter. My DMs are open if you want to reach out to me. But we're not going to be bringing on too many more guests to this show. It used to be that my plan was every other episode we're going to bring on guests. But that's just hurting our passion at this point, hurting our motivation. And I think it's better if me and Matt, we just keep to us as the default, and then every now and then bring on guests, which will probably be pretty rare. So I'm sorry to anybody who's disappointed, but I think the most important thing is that we keep motivation up for this show, and this is the thing that me and Matt need to do in order to do that. So that's our announcement.
It's also worth saying that, all the same, we really encourage you guys to continue interacting with us.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Follow the links in the description of every video to the Twitter link and to the wiki, and please, we look at those blogs and everything. We love to hear what you guys have to say. So keep up the good work on that end. We would love to hear what you guys have to say.
And it seems to me like most people don't use the blogs. Most people stick to Twitter. Yeah. So if that's what you're comfortable with and that's how you want to reach out, go ahead. In terms of bringing people on this show, I think that we need to stick to the dynamic that we started it for, and that's me and Matt. So I really, really appreciate that there's been so much engagement and that people have been so interested in coming on. But ultimately, we have to do what brings us motivation, and that's the way to keep the show going. So thanks for understanding, guys. If you've got questions, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer. So anyway, with that announcement out of the way, I think it's time for us to talk about our character for the day.
Yes, and our character is Hank, the American Engine, or as apparently the wiki, his official title is Hank the Giant Engine, and I don't really like that one.
Where did they get that?
Actually, there's a footnote, so let's see. Oh, from the Hank Story Library book. That's
okay. Well, at least
weird.
It's from somewhere. At least they didn't make it up. Hank the Giant Engine. I have to say, I really love Hank's design. I love his color. It's like this really deep. It's a very, I'm realizing he's the colors of the American flag now, which I probably heard or noticed at some point. But that is the blue that they put on him. It's like a much more of an American blue.
And I think it's fascinating, his livery, because with a lot of these new characters, what Lemmy and I like to think is when a new character comes to Sodor, when a new engine arrives, they get to decide their livery.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is a livery that Hank would have had in Pennsylvania or wherever he worked on the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's like the fact that there's just this focus on individuality and that everybody gets to decide what they look like, I think is pretty beautiful. And it says a lot about Hank. It's like, so he decided, he leaves America, but then decides to get painted, whether he realizes it or not, very American-looking colors.
Right, the red, white, and blue. And, I think this is interesting that they let him keep the cow catcher, or, what happens there? Because he has this cow catcher. I feel like with any other American engine, they would have swapped that out in Britain for a set of buffers.
The obvious answer is that, like, the show wanted to emphasize he was American, so they left it on there. I do want to be wary about making Hank just an American stereotype because, I mean, it's so easy to do, the fact that they made him,
He comes in with Hail to the Chief playing.
Yeah, it's like, I know he was designed to kind of be a stereotype, and that he is in a lot of ways. I mean, the accent that Michael Brandon gave him and everything, despite the fact that if he's from Pennsylvania or anywhere around there,
he has a pretty Texan accent.
Yeah, it's like that's what British people see Americans as, I'm sure. But I do want to be wary of making Hank a stereotype because I don't think his character is just American, because that's not a character. No. And I think a lot of people view him that way. It's like, oh, well, he's just the American one, and he's like a stereotypical American. But
to be fair, I think the episode actually does a good job of deflecting that a little bit, because Hank isn't this American stereotype. He's not this overconfident, bombastic, insensitive guy.
He's incredibly humble, and he's not the type to chant USA #1,
He has this power, but at the same time, he has this incredible patience throughout the whole episode that he's not presented as a critical stereotype of Americans. It's actually Thomas, the British locomotive, who is the one that causes all the inconvenience and causes everything to go wrong in the episode, and Hank's patience is what carries it.
Yeah, that's something that I really just adore about Hank, is that this may just be because we only saw one episode of him, and so we didn't ever get to see him at his breaking point, but I think he's one of the most patient engines on Sodor, for sure.
If not the most, I mean, like...
Yeah. I would even say the most patient, is that, like, because Thomas, Hank offers his help, like, 5 times, and Thomas is just like, no, I don't need help from you, I can handle it on my own. And to be fair, at the beginning of the episode, Hank approaches Thomas and he's like, well, you're too small to pull that heavy train, let me help. And it's like, he doesn't mean to be insulting, but that is an insulting thing to say, especially like knowing what we know about Thomas and the fact that his whole life
that would have set him off, and it did.
Yeah, and it's like Thomas has been trying to kind of fight the big engines mentality his entire life.
It's the whole little engines can do big things stuff. And, if Gordon were there in that scene, he would be, Gordon would love Hank immediately, even though Hank would not have intended any offense.
Yeah, he'd metaphorically pat him on the back and, like, it's like if... I mean, what would have happened there if Gordon had been there? Is he'd invite him to the sheds later and be like, oh, you'll like Henry and James. The 4 of us will get along well. And, and then Hank would be polite and indulge it. But then slowly he would realize that, like, they're beating down on the smaller engines and he wouldn't be comfortable with it. That would honestly be really cool to see, is if at some point Gordon, Henry, and James kind of rolled Hank into their dynamic, and then Hank realizes that they're the way they approach the world is kind of oppressive. Yeah. And he's like, look, I can't have a part in this. I don't want to make enemies out of you fellas, but I just can't be involved in this. And Gordon's like, we 3 are the biggest engines on Sodor. How dare you? You might be big, but your hearts are small. He just rolls right out of there, and Gordon's just like, well, the nerve. And,
And Gordon would particularly admire Hank, I think, because Hank is a Pacific, and the K4s were the direct influence on Gordon's class.
Yeah, Gresley sees the boilers on the K4s, and what's weird is Gresley could have technically seen Hank specifically, and then saw that boiler shape.
That would have been interesting.
And was like, wow, I want to put that on my engines. Goes back to Britain, designs that into Gordon's class. And so Gordon, and the weird part is Gordon's the prototype, right? So there might be like literally no links in between. It's literally just Gresley sees Hank, Gresley designs Gordon, and Gordon's the first one. So like straight from Hank to Gordon, like a direct link. Wouldn't that be the weirdest thing ever?
Yeah, I wonder, so I wonder if this can be found. When did Gresley go to America?
Well, it really depends on when Hank was built. Because say, if we wanted Hank to be the first engine that Gresley saw, then all we would need to do is make Hank one of the first ones built in 1914. Which is another weird thing, is that Hank is old. He's like as old as Toby. They're both built in 1914.
So the production line for the K4s was that the first one, the prototype, was built in 1914, the 1737.
Interesting. Okay, so that was very early on.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I feel about Hank being the very first K4.
Yeah. Well, so the rest of them are 41 were built in 1917, 111 in 1918, and then it really bumps up in the 20s, like 50, 57. It's just like it's steady, and then so there's a total production of 425, and this ended in 1928.
So then, most likely, Hank is around as old as Gordon is. There is kind of an elephant in the room we have to get out of the way, which is that Hank, if you're extremely realism oriented, then
Hank is problematic.
Yeah, because Hank does not fit the loading gauge. And I know people drone on about that all the time, right? Oh, it doesn't fit the loading gauge, doesn't fit it's easy to hear that and just dismiss it, because no one really explains what that means. It means that if he goes through a tunnel, the tunnel will collapse, because he will run into the top of it. It's like, that's
He's a big fella.
Like, loading gauge isn't like they measure how heavy the engine is, and the bridge might weaken. It's like, no, sometimes it's that. Hank, though, here's an example. So the A1s, right, Gordon's class, when they were first built, their funnels and cabs, they were fine on the Great Northern Railway, but once the LNER was formed, their funnels and cabs were too tall, so they had to be cut down, and then they just barely fit through all the tunnels on the London and Northeastern Railway. Now, Hank...
Like flat top tunnel.
Yes. And Hank is, like, way taller than Gordon. Like, way taller than Gordon's original cab and funnel. Like if I've overlaid the two images before, it's ridiculous. It's like he's like 5-6 feet
He
taller
makes
than
Gordon look narrow gauge in some ways.
Yeah, no, it's really, they almost look like they're from different gauges. So It's like, Hank would have no chance of getting through probably any tunnel in all of Britain. Like, he would not fit. Like,
and that calls into question a lot of characters, especially Sam.
Yeah, there's no way Sam could ever work on... First, he'd collapse every bridge, but also... he
couldn't even be delivered anywhere on the island. That wasn't a dock.
Exactly. He would be stuck between any set of tunnels. So, like, Sam could never exist on the island. Hank could never exist on the island. But honestly, I don't know if I care. Because for a long time, I thought, okay, I refuse to put Hank anywhere on Sodor, because he's too big, right? And logically, yeah, that's true. Hank could never fit on Sodor. But I like him, so put him there. like that's the thing, is like...
The alternative is the Fat Controller changes the loading gauge of the island.
Yeah, and what you could just do is from day one, for whatever reason in your universe, the tunnels in Britain are way bigger, or Hank is smaller. You could do that. It's fiction. Just do whatever you want. And that might be what I do. I might just, because the wooden railway model fits through tunnels. Just, it's as simple as that, really.
I like that. That's the... I like that's the justification.
And, I mean, that's the thing, is that it's within your power as a creator to easily put Hank on Sodor. So why not do it, right? Because of some arbitrary measurements that exist in the real world. It doesn't destroy anything about his character. It's not like it's crucial to Hank's character that he brings down every tunnel that he goes through. That's not a thing. So,
And because contrary to the way a lot of people feel about the new series, I think that there is tremendous value in Hank as a character, even if we only saw him for one episode.
I think it's, in a way, I do wish we got to see more of him, but I think it's kind of cool we only saw him for one episode, because I really like what we saw of Hank. I like to believe that he's this patient, kind, humble engine. And if they'd done more with him, maybe they would have changed some of those elements, or turned him into something different. And I like that we have this one episode where his personality is distilled into, so we can just see him for who he is. And Hank, based on what I can see, is one of the kindest and most patient engines on the entire island. And yet, he has so much power. He is stronger, probably much stronger than Gordon.
And Murdoch.
And Murdoch, yeah. He's like, Hank is just, it's great that Hank has immense power, right? I think that Gordon, Henry, and James, when they first hear about Hank, they would probably be trying to snipe him from the first day. Like, oh, we got to get him into our crowd, right? Imagine what he could do for us, right? Maybe he's an American engine. They like goods trains or freight trains or whatever they call them over there. Maybe maybe he can take some of our goods. Maybe Henry doesn't ever have to take goods again, right? They're having those sorts of thoughts. And then Hank arrives. He spends the entire first day with Thomas, and that would be infuriating to Gordon, Henry, and James. It's like, Hank would finally come back to like the mainline sheds, and Gordon and Henry and James would be looking at him a little weird, and Gordon would be like, "So, did the Fat Controller make you spend the day with Thomas?" And Hank says, "Oh, well, yeah, it was his idea for him to show me around, but I had a lot of opportunities to go and do other stuff, but I liked hanging out with a little guy." There's a slight gasp, but they're like, "Oh, what? How?" And it's like, well, he wasn't annoying or pesky or, he has a short fuse, sure, but, who doesn't? It's like they're all just looking at him weird. Like, how did you? Sorry, you're this enormous American engine, and yet you're like tolerating this tiny little tank engine. Like,
I think even size aside, I think even a character like Neville or Murdoch would look at him a little weird because he spent the whole day with one of the most infuriating personalities on the entire island.
Yeah, because the thing is, Thomas has a very short fuse, and Thomas made a terrible first impression, yet Hank gave him the patience the whole day. I bet what's going through Hank's mind isn't, oh wow, this engine is infuriating, I can't stand him. I wish I could get out of here. I bet that what's going through his mind is, Thomas is in trouble. He's going to break down at some point. I can't leave. I'm going to wait, and he's going to keep saying, oh, I don't need your help, I don't need your help, and then eventually he's going to break down, and I need to be there to help him.
If I intervene before he is humbled, before his ego is finally crushed, then Thomas is just going to hate me.
Yeah, and worse, Thomas will be terribly embarrassed. So, Hank thinks to himself, like, I'm just going to wait this out. He's going to break down later. When he does, I'll be there to help him. When he asks me. I'm not going to do it against his will. And so he waits for Thomas to get his comeuppance and break down and ask, right? And that takes a lot of patience on his part. He knows he could intervene and push the train at any point, but he doesn't. And that says a lot about how he approaches problems.
It really is extreme emotional intelligence.
Yeah, no, really. And I feel like a lot of characters on Sodor might lean on that emotional intelligence as well. I feel like Hank would be such a great shoulder to cry on because he's just so kind and patient, and he just wants to help people. And, there would be a lot of engines that come to him with their problems because, firstly, he's good at keeping a secret. If there's something that, that they want to tell him or that they want to be honest about that they can't tell anybody else, then he's their man. But also, it's that he has this very simple worldview, I think, where he looks at problems, he looks at other people's struggles, and he thinks, well, that's not too complicated. Just gotta be nice to people. And that's the answer to most of his problems, and it works most of the time. And that's something that's actually pretty beautiful, is that, his worldview is simple. He doesn't get caught up in all the minutia. He doesn't care about the big expresses and grandeur like Gordon does. He's not obsessed with his paintwork like James is.
And he's not obsessed with the little things, even things that would be annoying to other engines.
It's water off a duck's back with him.
Yeah.
He and Porter would get along great. And not just because they're American. No. But because they view the world very similarly in that they're gonna let the difficult stuff go. It's gonna just wash right over them. Thomas semi insults Hank many times during the episode, but Hank can understand. He's just saying that because he's upset and embarrassed, and he's so obsessed with proving that he's stronger than I am. But whatever. I understand how it feels. He cuts Thomas a lot of slack because he understands that Hank is not the one who's struggling in this situation. Hank, he's on this brand new island. He gets to just spend the day just going around doing nothing, seeing the sights. Life is easy for him right now. But Thomas is freaking out in his head, thinking, "Oh, this goddamn engine's gonna come and take my breath."
I'm sure he's not stronger than a Sodor engine, right?
I love that line where Thomas is just like, "I'm sure he's not stronger than a Sodor engine."
What is he thinking when he says that? Is he comparing Hank to someone like Murdoch, or is he? I think he's comparing himself, like just any engine on the island.
It's interesting that Thomas thinks in tiers, right? Because, the Fat Controller arrives, says, "Oh, Hank is arriving today," and then Hank pulls into the yard. Percy sees him and thinks, "Wow, he's so cool!" And Thomas is smiling, but not, genuinely, and he's like, "I'm sure he's not stronger than a Sodor engine." Saying that to himself to comfort himself. And, it's interesting because if Hank were like Stanley, right? Thomas would be like, "I'm sure he's not stronger than me." If it's someone like Hank, he's like, "I'm sure he's not stronger than a Sodor engine. At least my nationality is superior, right? Not me specifically, but, I can rally behind engines like Gordon and Henry, who can prove that they're better than him. If it was Diesel 10, I'm sure he's not stronger than a steam engine." And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And, Thomas always looks for a way to justify that he is not the inferior one, because he's terrified of being inferior. And that's the interesting thing. And that's something that Hank realizes immediately and deals with in this episode. And just through his patience and kindness, manages to comfort Thomas and kind of show him, "Listen, I'm not trying to replace you, little buddy. I'm just here to help."
And I think it's interesting because there's precedent for this. So, at least, by season 12 standards, we could put this in the chronology wherever, but Hank is the first character whose basis, this is according to the wiki, whose basis has never run in the United Kingdom. So Hank is likely the first of the truly foreign engines to join the railway.
Hank deals with a lot of the prejudice that other engines would have to deal with after him. What a great first engine to arrive. For it to be Hank, who's the foreigner, right? If it was somebody like Hiro.
If it was Vinny.
First, that's interesting. We just went for two very different scenarios. Like what you're saying is that the engine who arrives would make a terrible reputation for foreigners, and that would be the fear. Mm-hmm. For me, I was thinking the engine that arrives who is a foreigner would be berated for just being a foreigner and would not have the patience to deal with it. Like if Hiro arrived, right? Mm-hmm. And he was the very first one, before Hank. Then Hiro would be just devastated and crushed by how the other engines treat him. It would be terrible. Whereas Hank, he can handle it. He's a big guy.
Hiro would have eventually, if he were facing that sort of attention from all the engines, he probably would have just shut himself off.
Yeah, he would be
from the others,
because Hiro is way more sensitive. Whereas Hank, I feel like, is very in touch with his emotions, but he's got a hard exterior. You can... Hank's the type of guy that he's like, "Go on, punch me." "What?" "Punch me in the face." "Go on." Just to get their anger out. And you punch him, and he's like, "You feel better?" And they're like, yeah, a little bit." It's that's the kind of guy that Hank is. And it's not that he can't get his feelings hurt, but it's that he's he lets a lot go, and he's tough. He's really tough.
And I think
not in any way that's unhealthy.
Yeah, and I think it is worth saying, so I think we need to figure out some chronology here, because the very next season, we have Hiro and Victor. We do have characters whose basis has never operated in the UK that come almost immediately after this season. So I'm imagining Hank is earlier on than many of these characters.
Yeah, I would say so.
So he's the first of these foreign engines to come that really helps to break the ice. And maybe this lays the groundwork for other engines like Porter to come later on.
Yeah. And, I almost wonder if the Fat Controller went to America, shopped around, and chose Hank specifically because he saw his immense patience and kindness and could see that. And also, he's kind of close to Gordon. Like, he's a Pacific. He doesn't look too... Like, if he brought over, like, a crazy, big, ridiculous-looking
If he did bring over a Challenger, the other engines would have been fearing for their lives.
Yeah, whereas, like, Hank is kind of an okay middle step where it's like, okay, they're not going to freak out too much. He looks familiar enough.
When do you think Hank arrived on Sodor?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. Well, who appears in the episode? Like, who? Because it's just Thomas, Percy, Hank, and then who's at the
Fat
party?
Controller, and then the party is
the Fat Controller. Yes, I'm sure that the Fat Controller will.
I'm just listing everyone who appeared in the episode. Okay, some children.
I wonder what year was the Fat Controller built. I wonder. We should look that up.
Well, at the end, it's just the Steam team. So
there's Emily. Emily's there.
Emily's there. But we can also remove her.
So it's interesting because in theory, Hank could arrive in the 50s, like before even Duck arrives, because that's the engines that arrive on the island. So that would actually make sense if Hank arrived in the 50s, because I mean America, it's weird. Like the steam engines in America, they like evolved at like the same way British engines did, but at like a different rate, like at a different time. Like they started earlier because like an engine like Hank, an engine as big as Hank's class it came along in the 1910s in America. That wouldn't arrive till the 20s in Britain. So it's like offset by like 10 years. And likewise, the steam engines were being replaced in America in the 40s and 50s. In Britain, it was the 50s and 60s.
I could imagine that, by this time in the 50s, the Fat Controller might be looking for a nice big goods engine.
Yeah, maybe.
And this is before really preservation dieselization becomes this absolute death knell. When the Fat Controller is looking for an engine like a Hank who can really take those heavy loads.
Yeah.
He visits the U.S. and sees Hank, and this is in like 1955, 56. They're being withdrawn anyway, and the Fat Controller kind of feels bad leaving Hank behind.
Yeah. I could see Hank arriving in the 50s. I kind of always feel that way whenever we see a new series episode where there are, like, only the Steam team in it. Because it's like, so many of those characters, like, we always ask, where is Duck? Where's Donald and Douglas? Where is everybody?
This may have been before them,
Yeah. Like, that's kind of what it would point to. When we watch Season 1, we don't ask those questions. Oh, the reason the first 7 are only there is because that's all the engines there are. Well, what if that's the case with the new series, too? And it's just that the new series is really the old series.
And this also fits into the timeline, right? Because there has to be some sort of period of time where there aren't enough steam engines arriving that Oliver is a big deal.
Yeah.
That Oliver is a huge deal. So this still leaves some of that gap there. And even at that, Hank is this American engine, so he's almost not even part of that narrative. The point still stands. I totally, from the character of the episode, I definitely see Hank as someone who would arrive before dieselization.
Well, because the thing is, when Hank arrives, it doesn't feel like charity. It feels like he's going to get the job done. It feels like he's here to pull trains we literally can't pull right now. And Hank can do it. And Hank's powerful enough to get it done. The jobs he does are necessary. It's not just to rescue him. It's because we can't do those jobs any other way. I think this is a pretty solid story for him, is that he arrives in the 50s in order to deal with a really heavy workload. That's why it's not unusual that a steam engine is arriving at this time, but it makes sense because over in America, Hank is being withdrawn, but here, he has another 10 years of being a normal locomotive. And even past then, of course, because this is Sodor, so,
He's still going to be, like, the strongest engine on the island for many years.
Yeah, so it is interesting, is like, we explored the idea that Gordon, Henry, and James would want to kind of involve Hank in their dynamic, but I think what's more likely to happen is that they would dislike him immediately because of the whole, because he's American. It's like, because Gordon is just this ardent nationalist, he's this kind of queen-praising kind of,
queen-pulling, too.
Yeah, queen. He's this queen pulling, flag saluting, just like, he loves Britain, right? I get that vibe off of him. And he's proud to be British, and, he is...
If Duke is proud to be British, Gordon is like 10 times that.
Yeah. It's like, I think that because Gordon is just like, he's proud of everything he happened to be. He happened to be a huge engine, so he's proud of that. He happened to be Great Northern. He happened to be
the express engine.
Yeah, he happened to be an express engine, so he's proud of that. He happened to be a Great Northern locomotive, so he's proud to be that. Everything that he is, he's intensely proud of, to an unhealthy degree. And yeah. I'm sure his nationality is among those things. And so, seeing Hank on Sodor, he would immediately dislike him. He's like, he's not our kind. And it's like,
And it's funny because Hank is the opposite of all of those...
I know.
Idealizations that Gordon talks about. Yet Hank is the one that wears his nation's colors.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, is like, And I would just love to see an interaction between the two of them, though, because it's like, Hank would just be so patient, and he would just let Gordon talk, and just, blabber and spit as he speaks, and he's just like, you are not welcome here. You're ruining the homogeny of our wonderful island. It's like,
Look at your cow catcher. And Toby's in the back corner, like, Gordon.
Oh my god. I'm imagining Hank would have his eyelids drawn, like he would kind of look exhausted and kind of a little bit annoyed, but he would be waiting patiently, not even trying to get a word in, just waiting for Gordon to finally tire himself out, And that's another thing. You speak. I'm out of steam. and Hank's just like, all right, well, I respect how well you pull the express. And Gordon just cocks an eyebrow. He's like, what? I respect you. But I just...
Gordon just has a conniption.
It's like,
No one can pull the express like you, Gordon.
I agree with you. Just totally, through his patience, he just dismantles Gordon's everything. Like, I'm imagining, prior to this scene, Gordon just thunders into the shed, right? Goes and fights with Hank. He tells Henry and James, stay out here. I'll deal with him. And then after he talks to Hank, he comes out of the shed and he's like, I like him. And Henry's like, what? You can't! I'm sorry. I don't know what happened in there. He's so damn nice!
Handsome! He's so damn handsome!
And then they get married.
I love you, Gordon.
But you're my great uncle!
Oh, no.
This was derailed badly. Like Hank would, if he was ever on Sodor.
Let's touch on the welcome party, because I think that's something that isn't necessarily about Hank, but it's something about Sodor in general, because this is the only time we see a huge welcome party being thrown for a new engine, but I like to think that it happens every time there's a new engine on Sodor.
Because the thing is, at the beginning of Heave-Ho Thomas, which is the episode we've been mentioning the whole time, this is the first time I've mentioned it by name, but I think, isn't that sad? We have one Hank episode, so we just say, the episode.
The episode.
But, at the very beginning of the episode, the Fat Controller tells Thomas and Percy, so Thomas, you've got to go and take Hank to his welcome party. He doesn't say, oh, by the way, we're throwing this big welcome party for Hank. Like, he says it like it's a thing everyone assumed. It's like, Hank's welcome party. Everyone gets one. It's like, that's the way he approaches it. As if everyone knows, like, oh yeah, every time we get a new engine, of course we throw them a welcome party. Like, what else are we going to do? And it's really adorable.
And Henry was so excited for the welcome party, he wore Gordon's face to the occasion.
Gordon, do you mind if I borrow one of yours? All right, but don't get it dirty, and put it back when you're done.
Oh, man.
But anyway, but it's really sweet that they do this. Like, every time they get a new engine, I imagine there is some sort of welcome party, which is really adorable. Hank would be just so appreciative. It's like, he would enjoy it so much, and any engine at all that was, like, skeptical of Hank, they would just not be after that event. Hank would talk to all of them, be so kind, and they would all just love him. Like, you know, he would make so many friends.
And you know what's funny is once dieselization hits, I think the engines would start to look at Hank and look to him as like, you know, he's on our side now. Look how big and strong he is. Like, imagine Hank on the island when Class 40 arrives and when, you know, Super Rescue happens.
It's interesting because I think Hank would have so much more compassion for the Diesels, not because he's perfect, but because he's 10 years ahead of everybody else. This happened in the U.S., and he probably got mad at the Diesels and feared them just like the engines on Sodor do. But that's over for him.
And he probably knows what's coming before everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, you know, he doesn't want to kind of ruin the mood, but he's kind of like, you know, in his head, he's like, you know, well, it's only a matter of time. I mean, really, it's a miracle. This is like stepping back in time. There's so many steam engines around here. How long is this going to be this way? You know, like, that's probably what he's
thinking. And he's saying that to, like, Gordon, and he's like, what do you mean? We'll always be here.
Well, I mean, Gordon, I just came from a place where they've all been replaced by diesels.
Replaced by diesels? Those boxy, oily things? That'll never happen, Hank. Don't you worry.
A diesel passes by with a goods train.
Yeah. Like, I wonder if Hank would feel guilty. He arrives in the 50s, right? Everybody's thinking steam will last forever, and he knows it won't. Like, he's seen it. He knows for sure.
But he doesn't want to freak everyone out by
so,
being
like,
the end times guy.
Yeah, so what is he supposed to do? I like the idea...
That really fuels his personality right there, what you just said. Because, you know, if he arrives on Sodor with all of this baggage, knowing that, he's not worried about whether or not Thomas is pulling a train that's too heavy for him. He wants to let the engines ride out, you know, these 10 years before everything really goes to crap.
That's true. So it's like when he comes up to Thomas, and Thomas is feeling threatened and he's worried that he can't pull this train. Firstly, Hank is thinking he's probably got an inkling of what's coming. And secondly, he's probably thinking, you know, he doesn't get a lot of these left. Everybody here, they might be gone in 15 years.
Yeah, he may be thinking, because again, this is his first day, you know, this is probably all hitting him like, oh gosh, you know, I'm safe, I bought another 10 years, I'm on Sodor now, and so then he's like, you know, gosh, you know, these engines are running out of time.
Yeah.
So he's going to let them do whatever they want. I'm just here to look after you guys.
It's really impressive, too, how calm Hank is, because I think that what's happened is there's an arc we did not see in America, where Hank was terrified for like 10 years.
Yeah.
He was like, he knew it was the end, and then he finally he finally found peace. And he's like, you know what? If it's gotta end, it's gotta end.
Can you imagine Hank, like, in Pennsylvania, this giant GG1 just, like, passes by and is, like, being a complete jerk?
Yeah.
And is like, that's, like, you know, it's just the beginning of the end. Like, all these other diesels, because, you know, the American railroad culture around dieselization is not what it was in Britain.
Yeah.
In Britain, they were sad to see the steam engines go. But in America, the culture was really leaning towards a diesel engine.
Yeah, no, it was almost excited. And it's like, and yet, you know, and Hank would probably feel so betrayed by his country, which shows incredible, it says a lot about him, again, that he would
ironic, because the K4 is the state locomotive of Pennsylvania.
It's interesting because Hank maintained his national pride, even though his country did what it did to him. It's like how we've talked about before, how Oliver would feel betrayed by the Great Western and not necessarily want to bring them up all that often. Hank seems to have realized, look, these people have their problems, right? But it's my country. What am I going to do? And that's kind of where he's at. He's like, he's not going to blindly defend everything they do. He knows they do terrible things sometimes. But he's an American. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of beautiful. It's like acknowledging the fact that his country had problems, and at the same time, he doesn't want to deny
that
where
it personally
he came from.
wronged him, too.
Yeah.
It forced him to leave.
I imagine what would have happened is that he came to peace with the fact that he was going to be scrapped. And then the Fat Controller swoops in at the last moment and saves him. And he's like, wait, what? Wow, okay. And so now, but he's still at peace, right? So it's like he's just seeing this as borrowed time, right? And he feels lucky that he can still be around, but he's already kind of at peace with this. He's expecting any minute he's going to get scrapped, or any hour, or any day, or any year, right? It's coming at some point. But he's not scared of it anymore. He's not afraid of being scrapped.
Yeah. And then he's just looking around at everything, and, he's probably just so appreciative, like, anytime, like, when diesels start coming to the island, the engines are all freaking out, he's not, it doesn't faze him.
You realize how much more emboldened the diesels would be in America, considering the climate there? Like, that they were so much more accepted. They weren't having to sneak their way in.
Yeah.
They were fully encouraged. And so they would have been way meaner in America. Whereas in Britain, like, the diesels that come to Sodor are like, when Class 40 says, "Not bad, I've seen worse, at least you're all clean," Hank's like, "You think we're clean?" Like, he would just be surprised that that he's actually got the sense to be polite in any capacity. It would be very impressive to him.
It's like when I see those British pate videos of they're like, "Oh, we're sad to see the steam engines go," and stuff. And there's that sort of... Because there's that symbolism of the cutter's torch and engines on sidings. In America, they're just like, yeah, of course they're on sidings.
Yeah.
Got to make way for the new engines. Like, it's not even a question. So, Hank comes over and there's this melodrama about, Percy sobbing to Hank about engines being cut up even. And, Hank is like, well, that's the way it goes, but, all the most we can do is just, hold our heads up high and keep doing what we're doing. We're very lucky to be where we are. And that's one of the most valuable things that Hank contributes. And that's certainly why, the loading gauge issue aside, I don't want to sacrifice him. I don't want to let him go.
Yeah.
There's so much here.
Hank is interesting because he's an enormous engine who could wield a lot of social power on Sodor, the same way that Gordon does. And yet he doesn't. He doesn't use his immense size to bully other people. Instead, he's the exact opposite. He's more patient and kind than the smallest engine even is. And that, I think, is a great juxtaposition of character traits that make him an admirable character. Because he could easily have a great life and be idolized by all the littler engines and put all of them down, but he doesn't, because he knows that that's wrong, and he has a very strong moral compass. That's, I think, what makes him so special. The fact that he arrives to Sodor and doesn't look down on Thomas. He can see that Thomas is much weaker than him and needs his help, right? And he maybe puts that a little too bluntly.
And then he learns real quick after that.
Yeah. Hank, like you said earlier, Hank has a lot of emotional intelligence. And I think it's very easy for him to quickly size up a situation and realize how to comfort another person, what makes them uncomfortable, what they need out of him.
Right. It's funny because I think that even Hank might be a better listener than even Edward or Boko. I think sometimes we hold Edward up as like the pinnacle, but at some point he decides to act.
Edward is a little bit too focused on trying to solve problems sometimes, where I think Edward is thinking, what's the solution to this given crisis, right?
Edward doesn't always realize that sometimes people just need to vent, and so Hank fills that gap.
Yeah, I imagine if Edward and Hank were in a shed together. Say Molly comes to a shed that Edward and Hank are at, right? And she asks, she comes to them with a problem. Edward, and she says, Gordon's been so mean to me lately, and Edward would be like, I'll have a word with him. And whereas Hank would be, now hold on, Edward, don't get those little wrinkles in your forehead.
That's sweet.
So, Molly, what did he say to you, dear?
She threatened to take my coaches away.
Edward's response would be like, that the Fat Controller would never let that happen. Where, he's giving a practical response. Yeah. Whereas Hank would be like, well, that's not fair at all. You deserve those coaches. It would be more like he's showing her that she's valuable and worth it. He's kind of undoing the emotional damage Gordon did. Whereas Edward is kind of like, he's like a parent trying to stop his kids from tearing each other apart. He's just grabbing them by the collars, just being like, no, calm down. Whereas Hank is just kind of like, he's like the friend just kind of sitting there with his arms folded, just listening and nodding and Oh, I see. Oh, that's terrible. Mm-hmm. It's like, he's
Here's the approach. Edward would like talk to if the kid is being bullied, Edward talks to the administration and like gets the bully suspended and whatnot. Hank will just take you out for ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because in that way, Hank is actually quite non-confrontational. Because a lot of the time, because I feel like, likewise, it's not that he's better than Edward at this, it's that he approaches it differently.
They have different priorities, is the thing.
Yeah, Hank is just looking out for the immediate emotional concerns of the person who came to him. Whereas Edward is thinking, okay, I can coddle them all I want, and sometimes I will. But if I don't deal with their problem directly, then Gordon will just go and hurt Molly again. So I've got to go and deal with him.
So yeah,
so
I think that's also one of Hank's flaws we're kind of getting at here, because I thought this a little bit earlier about why didn't Hank also step in before Thomas broke down? But I think it's also worth saying that Hank is not going to go after Gordon if Gordon is mistreating another engine, let's say.
Yeah, Hank's going to go and comfort that engine, right? But he's not going to stand up to Gordon unless he absolutely has to. He doesn't, because I think
that is his cynicism. I think he just thinks that things can't change.
That's true, but also I think Hank is a little bit uncomfortable with standing up to anybody because he knows he can be terrifying. Like, Hank is enormous, right? He could best anybody if he had to go up against them. So he's very careful not to ever be intimidating because he knows he could really scare somebody if he actually, stood up to anybody, right? Even Gordon would kind of be like, Gordon would... If Hank kind of backed Gordon into a corner, Gordon would be all wide-eyed and, hold on, I'm your friend here. And Hank's like, I'm not threatening you, Gordon, I'm just trying to talk. I know.
Here, take my wallet.
If he were human, he would be reaching, like, underneath the desk to hit the button to call, like, the security. Hank could intimidate anybody. And so I think he's very aware of that. So especially if it's somebody like Thomas, who's way smaller than him, he's not going to be too confrontational. He's not going to say, that's it, well, I'm taking your train, because Thomas will be like, Thomas will panic, right? So Hank's...
Oh, man.
So, I think that's...
Get your filthy cow catcher off me!
Yes. So I think that's part of why Hank isn't confrontational. Also, it's the fact that, in order to be confrontational, he would have to believe he can solve the problem himself.
Yeah.
And considering what happened to him in America, where he had to accept the fact that the system is going to have him destroyed and that there's nothing he can do about it, I think Hank is past the point of believing that he can change the world. He can help... What he could do over in America is comfort his friends that were on the sightings. He could tell them, it's all right, you can appreciate the time you have left, and, is there anything you want to tell me before you go, and those sorts of things, right? But he's not going to try to fix the situation. He's not like Oliver. He's not going to say, I'm going to escape. He's not that daring. He doesn't believe that can be done. But yeah, so anyway... I think we've said, a lot of really interesting stuff about Hank. I've always really loved him as a character. Mostly just for his personality and the fact that it's like, he's so wholesome. It's like, he's just so nice and kind and just admirable and happy. Like, a lot of the characters have serious baggage, and to an extent, Hank does too, but he's kind of overcome it. And you rarely see that with characters. Usually... they're just brought down by it for the rest of their life. Gordon is brought down by the loss of his brothers for the rest of his life. James is brought down by his own vanity the rest of his life. But Hank looked Scrap in the eyes and said, I'm not going to let you change who I am. I'm not going to let you control my life. And he accepted it. And by doing that, he's become a better person than most of the engines on Sodor.
Yeah, I think what this discussion has shown is that Hank is... exemplary of a character who is very much at peace and in tune with the reality of everything going on around him.
Yeah.
But his emotional intelligence really makes him such a nice engine for the whole Northwestern Railway really to lean on. All in all, Hank is such a valuable character that I wouldn't want to let him go, and he's one of the greatest things about the new series, who's also one of the most underrated parts of the new series.
Yeah, no, I think that I like him so much that I'm willing to break reality because I mean it's running Hank on the Northwestern Railway is like running Thomas on the Skarloey Railway. It's insane.
Even if the wheels fit everything else.
Yeah. And that's like insane, but I'm still gonna do it. That's how much I like Hank. And that has to say something.
Yeah, and that's a great way to cap this off, I think.
Yeah.
Is just saying how much value Hank has as a character. I would really love to see him used in more projects, including my own, and I think that, I'm really excited to hear what everyone else has to say, because I think Hank is one of those characters that people really have different interpretations of.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I'm curious what other people think of him. Alright, anyway, so I've been Master of the Lemons, aka Lemmy.
And I'm here, the Japanese Train, aka Matt.
And thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks, and see you in the next one.